we have a lot to pack in today, so hopefully by then we'll have our co-chairs. So why don't we go ahead and get started?
All right, we're good on YouTube now.
Great. Shannon, if you wouldn't mind populating the slides, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, again. Thank you for joining us for our February 9th Community Advisory Group meeting. Once again, my name is Johnell Bell, one of your co-facilitators, joined by my other co-facilitator. And I'll turn it over to Lisa to welcome as well. Lisa.
We're so happy to have everyone here today. I'm Lisa, and we hope to be joined by our co-chairs here momentarily.
Great. Next slide, please. We'll go ahead and do our kind of ground material. Closed captions will be available both in English as well as in Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window, https://ibr.news-captions. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of how you may access closed captions. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen, then click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Next slide, please. We're always grateful for our ASL interpreters. Thank you both, Amanda and Andrea. In the effort to continue to center equity, there is an ASL interpreter in addition to closed captioning. To make sure the interpreter is always visible, please right-click their video and select Spotlight Video. For those watching on YouTube, when we screen share, you will be able to see the slideshow, closed captioning, and the ASL interpreter. You will still be able to hear different people speaking, but may not see them. Next slide, please. Again, reminder for webinar participation tips. Again, thank you for joining us today. Please join audio by either phone or computer, but not by both. This helps to reduce the feedback. We encourage panelists to turn on your video. Helps even in this virtual space to create a sense of community. Please keep your audio on mute when not speaking. And if you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. Next slide. Public input instructions. There will be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today, essentially around 5:45 p.m., give or take. Verbal public comment will be welcome in the Zoom webinar during the designated time with the option to turn on your web camera. Please use the link located in the meeting description on the YouTube meeting page or on the IBR CAG meeting webpage. Commenters will not be allowed to share their screens and will be removed from the room once the public comment period concludes. To comment by phone, you may dial 669-900-6833 or 408-638-0968. You'll want to enter the meeting ID number 993-5459-6043 and of course include the passcode, which is 674942. You'll want to also dial *9 to raise your hand. And after you are invited to speak, dial *6 to unmute yourself. Next slide, please. To submit comment after the meeting, please fill out the comment form on the program website or email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with CAG Public Comment in the subject line. You may also call 360-859-0494 for our Washingtonians or 503-897-9218 for Oregonians. You may also dial the 800 number, which is 888-503-6735 and state CAG Public Comment in your message. Written comments need to explicitly say CAG Public Comment in the subject line or in the body of the message for them to be identified and distributed to CAG members. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to advisory group members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, as we again set the tone for our meetings, our meeting space is for us to always put relationships first, that we want to keep focused on our common goal, to always question and notice the power dynamics in the room, and for us to create a space for multiple truths and norms, to be kind and brave, practice examining racially biased systems and processes, and for us to look for learning. Next slide. Okay, with that, I believe I can't see folks, but do we have one of our co-chairs, Lisa?
Yeah, Mr. Washington is here. Co-chair Washington.
Right, co-chair Washington. I will turn it over to you. I'll just review the agenda real quickly. We are going to receive an update here in just a moment. Today, we're going to roll up our sleeves. We've heard from all of you the real interest in understanding Section 106, which is, of course, the Cultural and Historic Resources section of NEPA. We also want to offer you a community engagement update. This will be an item that you'll see ongoingly as we roll up our sleeves on community engagement. There'll be an opportunity to hear information sharing relative to February IBR program community engagement activities, and then we'll have a discussion. We will receive public comment and then have final thoughts and then a meeting adjournment. Mr. Co-chair Ed Washington, over to you. Next slide, please.
Yes.
Ed, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. I was having difficulty breaking the code today. I'd like to just welcome everyone here. It's been a while since we last talked, but it's a beautiful day. So I know that we will bring some of the sunshine that's outside today. And I'm sure most of us would like to be out there in the sunshine, but just look forward to a wonderful meeting. So good to see you and to welcome you all. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And welcome Lynn Valenter, our other co-chair. And Lynn is going to lead us through some CAG sharing. If you could pull that slide back up just for a second as Lynn gives a welcome. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to point out the, oh, okay, we can do this first. So I can't see all the CAG people on the call. Let me see if I can do a better job. I can only see 6 at a time. But part of this is all of us getting to be cohesive. And I have to say, some of us are trading out. People have moved, people have taken different roles. We've got new people onboarding. And so for those of us who've been together for over 2 years now, hopefully there's a sense of camaraderie. But at one point we were anticipating being able to see each other face to face, and that just hasn't happened. So we are working to generate esprit de corps absent seeing each other face to face. So if we can, I think, Lisa, because I can't see, I can only see 4 people at a time, I'm going to ask for your help. But if people would just maybe raise their hand and share your name, organization, affiliation, or if you're an at-large pronoun, and then share how many cities you've lived in, just as a bit of an icebreaker. And we'll go through this fairly quickly, but again, appreciate your time. So I will start. But if we don't have the slides up, we won't remember what to say. Okay. Lynn Valenter, my organizational affiliation is co-chair of the CAG. My pronouns are she, her, and I have lived in, gosh, I honestly can't say how many cities. 8 or 9, maybe. But I've been in Portland. I grew up in Portland, and I've been in the Portland metropolitan area for almost 30 years now. So Sam Kim, I see your hand up. So yeah, if you do it that way, then you jump to the top of the screen. So Sam, if you'll go next.
You bet. Lynn, I just want to say that we actually did get together for the bus tours, and I thought that was pretty amazing. Getting to know everybody face to face. It was great. I think that was the only time we actually did get together, and I'm looking forward to additional
And I didn't
face-to-face.
get to go, so you're absolutely right. Thank you for that correction, Sam.
You bet. So Sam Kim, I'm a super commuter. I commute from Brush Prairie, Washington to Hillsboro, Oregon. And I'm a interim chief information officer for Washington County. I was in the US Navy, so we traveled a lot. So I lived in, 20 plus cities throughout the world.
Thank you. Marcus, will you go next?
I sure will. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you again. My name is Marcus Mundy. I'm at the Coalition of Communities of Color, Executive Director, he, him, his pronouns. And I have lived in 8 cities over the decades. So thanks very much. Good to see everybody.
Terrific. Jeffrey Temple.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jeffrey Temple, as stated, he, him pronouns. I'm with Fred Meyer. I am currently in Portland. I was born in Oregon. I would say I've lived in, I don't know how many cities, probably less than a dozen, let's say that, mostly in Oregon, out of state just a couple times, but most of my life in Oregon, and that's my story.
Terrific. Martha?
Yeah, Martha Wiley. I'm retired. I'm an at-large member, but focused on transit. And I have lived in 9 cities, including in Germany and Hawaii.
Oh, see all the things we didn't know. Thank you. Bill? Oh, you're on mute, I'm afraid.
There, sorry about that. I run this stuff too, and I should know better. I'm Bill Prouse with the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, representing them, and citizen of Portland all my life. I've lived in 2 cities, Portland and Eugene, where I went to school, and back, and worked for US West Communications for 30 years. Started in the mailroom, clawed my way to the middle, as I tell people, and then moved over to Portland State, was there for 7 years, and then was recruited over here to Owami to work in the business development, events, and youth programming area. So I've been involved in that, and been involved in a number of committees, public relations and the phone company doing government relations, et cetera, et cetera. So philanthropy too. So been here for a long time, and long family history in Oregon. Thanks.
Terrific. Michael?
Michael Kelly, Transportation Services Manager at Community in Motion. He, him pronouns, and the best I could come up with was 6 cities. So
6 cities sounds very impressive. So thank you for sharing. That works just fine. Dina?
So I'm Dina Horton. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association. She, her pronouns, and represent river users and multimodal freight users on the Columbia River as part of the CAG. I've lived in 4 US cities and 2 European cities.
Wow. Darcy?
Hey everyone, my name is Darcy Hoffman. I use she, her pronouns. I am with Workforce Southwest Washington, and I had to count. I've lived in 6 cities, 1 in Oregon where I'm from, and the other 5 all right here in Southwest Washington.
And my collaborator, counterpart, and co-chair, Ed Washington.
Yes, Ed Washington. My pronouns are he, him. I've lived in only 2 cities. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and moved here as a 7-year-old kid back in the 40s, and I've been here ever since. And actually, I didn't realize either Bill was following me in jobs or I was following Bill, because I worked at Pacific Northwest Bell, left there and went to work at Portland State University, plus other things. And I still just work part-time at Portland State University. So thank you.
I think I was following you, Ed. We left quite before US West before I did.
Oh, okay. Well, it's good to know that people will follow you. Thank you, Bill. Good to see you all.
Thank you. And Sherry?
Hi, good afternoon. Sherry Quall. I'm president and CEO of the Washington Trucking Association. I have lived in 4 cities across 2 states. I'm the small town girl, and I've officially lived in Washington longer than my home state of Utah.
Wow, is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? Nikia? Oh.
Right, trying to get all the buttons together. Click, click, click. Hi, my name is Nakia Hunter. I am the Vice President of the NAACP, representing the community. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we took the prompt down, but can you share how many cities you've lived in?
Oh, yes. Oops. I was born in Anchorage, Alaska, and I have lived in Clark County since 1986.
Great. Jana?
Hi, I'm Jana Jarvis. I'm President and CEO of the Oregon Trucking Association. I have lived in 6 states and 9 cities.
It's kind of a throwdown. Thank you.
All over the country. So there you go.
And Ryan?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Webb. I am the Engineering and Planning Manager for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. And I think I probably lived in at least 24 cities across 4 different countries.
Well, I just want to say we have a well-traveled bunch, and just to save us all, we didn't ask how many bridges you may have had to cross over during that time, but it does somewhat relate to the work that we're about to do. So thank you everyone for being here. I don't see any more hands as I squint at my monitor. I did want to note that we had originally planned on having urban design and section 106, and we swapped those. One of the things about committing to a 3-month schedule is that we have to stay fairly dynamic because we're planning on hearing things that haven't yet been developed. So if they're not developed and ready for us, we will need to be nimble, but we are trying to kind of foreshadow what are the topics that will be coming up. So both to create a sense of excitement and anticipation, but also planning so that people kind of know what to expect. I think we probably want to put some slides back up. Is at this point, I believe I'm turning it over to Program Administrator Greg Johnson. So yeah, this is where we're referring to the this month is section 106. Next month will be urban design. Next slide, please. Good. So Greg, if you're here.
I am here.
Terrific. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. The program is been tremendously busy, and we aren't doing as many publicly facing things, but we're the team is grinding away at this draft supplemental environmental impact statement process. So rest assured that the team is working hard. But recently we had a bridge tour with Congressman Larson, and he is up in the Seattle area, and he's an important member of the Washington congressional delegation. So he came down and spent a couple hours with us to see the old bridge and look at some of the elements of where a new bridge would be located. He asked some very intelligent, smart questions about cost and cost containment and how we are looking at funding this. So he was very, very interested and very in tuned, and he's on several key committees in Congress that will be helpful in moving this program forward. Just earlier this week, we had a number of congressional staff members from both states come and visit with us and take a tour of the bridge, once again, to get a better understanding of the existing facility and the existing technology that we're relying on, that next week will be 106 years old. So they were very, very impressed with the work that has to be done and the work that has been done so far. So it was, once again, a very good tour with those congressional staffers. We have done a presentation back in January for the Oregon Transportation Commission to get them up to speed on where everything is at. So we walked them through the cost estimating process and shared the $5 billion to $7.5 billion range, with the most likely cost centering around $6 billion. So they were understanding of why the costs have increased because of the inflationary and costs that we're seeing in materials, as well as some of the other factors that are impacting construction around the country and around the world, for that matter. So we know that there will be the potential for labor shortages, as we have a lot of work that will be going on, not only in this region, but around the country. So a lot of workers will be absorbed, and we're looking to work with Workforce Southwest Washington, as well as the sister agency in the Portland area, to make sure we have a trained workforce. So that was a large concern expressed by the Oregon Transportation Commission. On the 18th of January, the Assistant Program Administrator, Frank Green, did a presentation before the Washington State Transportation Commission. Once again, just to get them up to speed on the cost estimate and give them the status of where we're at on a number of items on the program. So we also had our Equity Advisory Group meeting on January 23rd. Kind of lightly attended because we had switched dates because we were in conflict with the Martin Luther King Day holiday, but still a very robust conversation with the Equity Advisory Group, and having conversations with next steps and how they can be most effective in advocating for equity on this program. And we also have been doing legislative briefings. As most of you know, we've received $1 billion commitment from Washington State. We are looking for $1 billion from the state of Oregon. So we will be in front of a number of legislators this session, getting them up to speed on what that need is, why it's imperative to get it done now. So we're working hard to make sure everyone has all of the information they need to make an informed vote as we move forward. So Jenna, I see you have a hand up.
I do, and I appreciate the update, Greg. I am curious about the $1 billion that Washington has committed. There seems to be some disagreement by the Oregon legislative body about whether that's cash in the bank or whether it's a promise on future revenue. Is there anything you can say to enlighten me there on that?
So my understanding of what Washington did, they have committed to the funding, and they appropriated on a annual basis, or on a biannual basis. So this year we will see an appropriation of dollars from that Move Ahead Washington program. So it is considered a solid commitment, and just the appropriations happen on a biannual basis.
And what's the time frame for that appropriation?
So we think that, and don't hold me to it, but we think that by July we will have an appropriation for the upcoming 2 years.
So every 2 years they would have to reappropriate?
That is my understanding of the process. And
I guess my larger question is it over a 10-year period of time that they're expecting to come up with $1 billion, or is it 20 years, or what is the time frame that this appropriation is designed to produce that revenue.
So once again, I am swimming in waters that are probably above my head. I'm not being tremendously familiar with how Washington state government budgeting works. But we know that if the program remains on schedule, we know that the large amount of dollars necessary will be in that 27, 28 time period. So it's not a linear that we're going to need 100 million every year for 10 years. It actually ramps up and then ramps back down as you get to those outer years. So once again, I'm not tremendously familiar with how Washington state budgets, but we know and they recognize that the need does not come in a linear fashion.
Thank you.
So, great questions. And I'll have our team dig in and find some more complete answers on that issue. So, but other things that have been going on, once again, our team has been working on technical reports related to the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. We are steaming towards having that draft supplemental environmental impact statement released in early fall, and we will have a comment period throughout probably between 45 and 60 days in the fall, and then we will wrap that process up and move into the final supplemental environmental impact statement process and record of decision for the year of 2024. So right now we are on target, we are on task, and the team is driving forward with technical reports that will go out to the cooperating agencies and partners. So we're also working on, within the supplemental, we're working on different technical aspects to make sure that we are covering potential design elements. We are looking at a bridge configuration of a single level. So that is something that it's not new, but it is something that we wanted to make sure was in the draft supplemental environmental impact statement, so folks can see the potential impacts of what having all of the modes on one level, rather than having transit underneath a lane and having the bike ped underneath the lane. We have an option that shows them all at one level. So once again, it's something that we are studying the impacts of, and we will have those two bridge configurations going forward. So we know that one level gives us some interesting options as far as bridge types and bridge aesthetics that we don't get with having transit underneath and having bike ped underneath. So we will be looking at that, and you will be seeing in the upcoming meeting some renderings that display these potential configurations. Let me see, what else? Oh, in March, we will be putting out our finance plan. You guys have heard some of the results from that, some of the draft results from that finance plan last month when we talked about the cost estimate as well as the funding sources. But the document itself will be more detailed with more analysis and more meat on the bones. And once again, this is something that we will be doing on an annual basis, is updating the finance plan of how this will move forward. So with that, I will take any questions that this group may have. Darcy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi, Greg. Any update on where the program is at with the community workforce agreement group?
So we are doing two things. We have taken community benefits as well as community workforce and separated those into two separate schedules. And so we are still waiting on the DOTs to finalize their overall plans for community workforce agreements within each state. So once we get those, then we will be able to take that and craft into our community workforce the elements of what both states are doing and make it into one comprehensive thing for the IBR program. So we're hoping that once again that work will start in earnest sometime this summer coming up.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
Darcy, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay, I see a hand up from Dina.
Yeah, hi. Curious if you have any updates for us on, I know it's still a long ways off from the permitting side of things, but how are conversations going with the U.S. Coast Guard, and if there's any updates on that front?
So that's a great question. We are we're working with our federal partners, and we have a draft notice of intent for this project that has gone to the U.S. Coast Guard for their review, and we're hoping to hear from them. That's the first step of many steps in the permitting process. So we are still having great conversations with them and hoping to address their concerns. We're also talking with impacted users on the river that have a need for heights over 116 feet. So those conversations are going well, and we think once again we can reach consensus on a 116-foot structure. So that is what our desire and our game plan is to move this forward. So conversations are continuing. Our federal partners once again met with the Coast Guard approximately 2 weeks ago. That would be Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Authority in a federal to federal agency to federal agency conversation. So things are moving forward. Jana, I see you have a question.
My apologies for asking too many questions so far this afternoon, but I was part of the CRC process several years ago, and I cannot recall the bridge height at the time that the design was kind of being put together. I remember bridge height being an issue. I'm just curious to know how this 116 feet compares with what we were looking at 7 or 8 years ago.
So that 116 feet is the exact height that was permitted by the Coast Guard during the Columbia River crossing project.
Okay,
And
that's what I was wondering, if that, because I remember there was a lot of discussion around that and that there had been something that was permitted. So thank you.
yeah, so we have updated our river users survey, and we have found that nothing has changed as far as the needs of river users. So once again, we know the folks who need more than 116, and those conversations are beginning. So any other questions or concerns that I can address? All right, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to Lynn and Ed.
Thank you. And we're going to just ever so smoothly turn it over to our experts, Haley and Cassie, I guess, sorry about that, who will be presenting on section 106. And thank you for digging in on this. This is not intuitive to most of us, so really appreciate you sharing your expertise and insight. And I do want to let the committee members know that there will be an opportunity for questions afterward. And it really is such a benefit to have experts here. So please kind of make notes as we go if you choose not to ask as we go. So with that, Haley and Cassie, thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing what you can share with us.
Thank you so much for having us. Genuinely our pleasure to be here and tell you a little bit more about the Section 106 process and anything that I can do to help clarify that further. As Lynn noted, we'll have a chance for questions, but in the meantime, really looking forward to explaining this a little bit better and hopefully generating some better understanding about what this larger process looks like in the IBR program and then is generally as well, especially because most of the intent here is to consult with the public and with Section 106 consulting parties. And so a double sort of advantage for having this conversation today. So thanks again for having me. Slide, please.
Dina, you have your hand up. Did you have your hand up from before, or did you have something you wanted to ask before we kind of jumped in here?
I'm so sorry, but I was just hoping she could speak a little slower. I have trouble hearing as fast as she can talk.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm glad I saw your hand up before we took any further time. Okay,
Thank
Cassie.
You. Yes, and and my name is Haley, by the way, and I'm happy to speak a little bit slower, Dina. Thank you for the feedback. I do sometimes get a little carried away, so happy to slow down. So I want to talk a little bit about the overarching sense of the Section 106 process. It is one in which invites input from the public and Section 106 consulting parties as we move through the process. And from a federal compliance standpoint, is a process that is, procedural. So it is one in which you must move through the various steps and framework that is high level laid out here in order to achieve that resolution at the end. So I want to talk a little bit about each of these steps because while they are represented by a small bullet point on this slide, the amount of effort and consultation at each of these phases is really important and really in depth as well. So that first step, Section 106, initiating Section 106, is really important for us to begin the process by establishing that, yes, we're going to conduct Section 106 because the qualifications for that requirement have been met, and allows us to understand who we should be working with in this area to best understand the cultural resources that we have in front of us. And so we initiate by contacting Section 106 consulting parties initially, and that includes a large group of folks that focuses on interactions with tribal partners, any organizations or entities or agencies that have a vested interest, and then certainly anyone that has a distinct or I am blanking a little bit on what the regulation describes precisely, but a cultural relationship with the resources in this space. So working with getting those groups together, and then also, as I've noted, initiating with the public. And so as I get towards the end of my presentation, I've got a little bit of information to share with you about what that step one looks like for us, and initiating with the public in the IBR realm as we are seeing it right now, because essentially that's the phase that we are looking at this moment. And so from there, we will move into the next phase, which we've been working on a little bit in the background and doing some consultation with our consulting parties as well. But the bulk of step two in identifying historic properties means that we go through various identification surveys and efforts to understand the historic resources or historic properties, cultural resources within the area. And there are a few qualifiers for sort of what makes an historic property. And I'll try not to go down too many rabbit holes with you here today, but suffice to say that above ground, that generally means buildings, structures, or sites that are 45 years or older, and below ground, the same 75 years or older. So that's sort of the primary lens through which we filter to understand where some of those properties are, and which ones to evaluate. And so in that identification effort, we are doing a lot of evaluation. And so for the built environment, that is analyzing the structure itself. When was it built? Checking into all of that history, describing all of the contextual history of the place. And that ranges from, on the very small scale, from a resource by resource basis, so house by house, for example, or commercial building by commercial building, but also in a really broad sense, understanding the broader community, the broader city, the broader region, and how it has shaped what we're seeing in the existing environment today. On the other part of that identification of historic properties, we are also analyzing below ground resources, right? Archaeological resources. So moving through studies and analyses to understand what resources we have within our area in a very similar way to our methodology above ground. And something to also mention here is that, of course, as we all know, the Columbia River Crossing Project also conducted NEPA, and within that process, also conducted Section 106. And there is an enormous amount of information and properties that were identified during that effort. And so even further in our identification process is analyzing all of that past work and then updating that for current resources, right? Some resources have become age eligible for consideration. Maybe a building has been torn down and is no longer needed for consideration, or other changes have occurred, or other information we have learned over time will allow us to most effectively, and in this moment, understand the historic properties that are in this area. So that is a fairly comprehensive effort that we are really on the cusp of getting kicked off with for the IBR program. And as we proceed over the next few months, we have some upcoming distributions that we will be sharing with the Section 106 consulting parties, culminating in an online public open house that we are aiming for in April. So we can be sharing a lot of that identification information and a lot of the work that we've done thus far with the broader public to be focused on the cultural resources element. So once we've identified all of the resources, the next step is to apply the criteria for an adverse effect or assess effects to those resources by the project design. So that is also an extremely comprehensive effort that is really multifaceted. And here again, I'll try not to take us down too many rabbit holes, but the basic of that is that there are kind of two effects. It's either adverse or not adverse. And what makes an adverse effect is perhaps a little bit of a rabbit hole, but there are regulatory requirements that you must assess and consider if it meets the criteria for an adverse effect. And then in that process, also, again, consulting with consulting parties and the public to ensure that we're considering everything, that we've not missed anything that is important to any communities, and that we are appropriately understanding the effects of this project on those cultural resources. So that is a really comprehensive effort that will benefit from updated design information as we proceed in the program and have additional understanding of how our program will impact this area. And so there again, similar to the identification process, that can drill down to the super detailed level, so building by building, and then also at the broader level, how are there any historic districts here? Sort of what is that looking like for this general space and region beyond just the single property or a single tax lot? So that is the pretty critical element of that assessing effects stage. And with Section 106, step 4, achieving a resolution, can go in a couple of different directions based on how many effects you have. And so if you have an adverse effect, then what Section 106 requires is that the project must minimize impacts to cultural resources at every possible opportunity, avoidance first. And if avoidance is not possible, then minimizing that impact to the degree possible, but then on top of that, mitigating for that adverse effect. So that feeds right into step 4, achieving a resolution, is mitigating for those adverse effects. Now, typically when you enter into a Section 106 project, you don't necessarily know with any level of certainty whether you're going to have an adverse effect because you have to move through the process in order to arrive at that determination. However, because CRC was conducted here previously, CRC did find that that program would have adverse effects on resources within the program area. And so as a result, as we move into planning IBR's Section 106 process, we have the past information and those past determinations to help us understand that we are certainly headed for an adverse effect within this program and beginning to gear ourselves up for what that step 4 will look like, achieving a resolution. And so as I mentioned, some of those paths that can occur with resolution achieving in step 4 of Section 106 is it's ultimately an agreement document. So let's say one avenue is no adverse effect, right? So that's the resolution, is that you're not adversely affecting any of the cultural resources. But in our case, that isn't the outcome. And so when you do have an adverse effect, there are 2 different agreement documents that you can select to move forward. So one of those.
Hey, Haley, before you go to that next section, sorry to interrupt. Just want to pause for a second and see if there are any questions. There's a lot of information I know we're throwing at CAG. And so let's just maybe pause for a second and see if there's any questions that folks might have about any of this before we continue here. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, happy to. And please, at any point, if there are any questions or it would be helpful to pause for questions, I'm very happy to accept an interruption. So please don't hesitate. So
I see Martha actually.
Okay, good.
Martha,
please.
Yeah, you mentioned that a resource was considered historic if it was 45 years old or older. Could you talk about how that came? I mean, why 45 as opposed to 50 or 100?
Yeah, great question, Martha. So it is actually 50 years is the age threshold for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. And while the Section 106 process and regulations differ in many ways than the National Register of Historic Places and what that means, it also really infuses that element of the National Register into Section 106 in a way that allows us to utilize the National Register of Historic Places framework for understanding and identifying cultural resources. And then we bring that into Section 106 as our step 2 of identification. So that 50-year threshold is really determined by the National Register of Historic Places and what makes a resource eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places.
So some of the buildings that were not historic for the CRC will be historic now. Because
that's exactly right. So that's exactly why we're going into additional identification efforts so that we can capture those resources that have aged into eligibility, is sort of how we refer to that. And so to go a little bit further into that, actually, the reason that we utilize 45 years in the transportation realm is because we recognize that in many cases, it will take about 5 years to conduct the project. And so we want to capture anything that may become 50 years old during the duration of the construction. And so actually for IBR, we're doing even less than 45 years. We're stopping at 1982 is our kind of threshold for now for that identification process. I know many of the historians have had a similar reaction of like, wow, that's not that long ago. But that way it allows us to have a nice buffer for those resources that may become 50 years of age by the time that the duration of the IBR construction is anticipated to be completed. So that's sort of how we're making sure that we are understanding any resources that may become 50 years old right towards the end of construction that could also be impacted. And we want to make sure to include that too. So great question, Martha. Thank you for that. Any other questions before I proceed? Awesome. Okay. So achieving a resolution, as I'd mentioned, those 2 agreement documents. So one of those is called a memorandum of agreement. And this is a very traditional agreement document in which to achieve the resolution of Section 106. The other agreement option is called a project level programmatic agreement. And I'm going to get into what those two are specifically and talk a lot more about the programmatic agreement on the coming slides, because that is the vehicle or the agreement document that we have selected for IBR. And we can talk a little bit more about why. But just for now, those are sort of the steps through the 106 process. So that slide is complete, and I want to maybe pause here. And Mr. Washington, please, I see that your hand is up.
Yes. It has more to do with the picture that we're looking at, the Section 106 process. I would assume that the picture that we're looking at is a picture of the signing for that.
That's correct. Yes, that's right. So the National Register legislation was signed in this photograph. That is exactly what we're seeing here.
That is one of the most interesting pictures. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the faces on there.
That's right.
Wow, that much interest was expressed in National Historic Register.
Yeah, and I think that's
wow.
Mr. Washington, hit exactly on why we use this image in this way, is because I think it really helps us to make clear why it is so important to care about cultural resources in so many different kind of areas and communities and project types, and in so many different ways in which our world weaves together with progression in construction, of course, but then also understanding cultural importance and history, and really why it's critical to emphasize that understanding and understanding how we're impacting that as we proceed. So that's something that we take really seriously here, and quite clearly was very serious when it was established.
Just one final thought. It looks like MLK is behind the president. I could be wrong on the person, but it looks like him to me. Wow. Okay.
That is also my observation. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we can go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. Great. So now that you've kind of understood a little bit of the steps through the process, I want to talk a little bit about the reports or deliverables that we are putting together as part of the Section 106 effort for IBR. And so these deliverables, particularly the first 4 that you're seeing listed here, correlate to steps in that process and provide all of the technical information for us to be able to populate those technical reports for the SDEIS and for the final draft EIS. So the first one on the list is really where we are right now, is the Historic Built Environment Baseline Report. And what that really does is go into a deep level of understanding of the historical context of the area. And so for our particular documents, because of our schedule and our process that we have coming, one strategy that we have employed is that we have put a lot of early efforts into understanding historical context of this place. And we are representing that largely in these baseline reports. It's a non-traditional sort of approach to 106. Typically, you would build out those contexts a little bit later in the process, but while we are waiting for more understanding about the resources that we may be impacting, we front-loaded that effort to understand the larger picture and that context in a more broad way, so that as we proceed through the steps, then those are a little bit more streamlined and we have a lot of that information as a foundation to begin with. So we are close to being able to share that built environment baseline report with the Section 106 consulting parties for review and input. And then once we collect that input and incorporate that input into our documents, then that will go live to the public audience. And as I'd mentioned earlier, that targeted April date for an online open house to share this information, namely the baseline report. We also, from the baseline, will then move into what we call determination of eligibility forms. And so that will dig into the tax parcel by tax parcel, sort of resource by resource, description and analysis regarding whether that specific resource does meet the criteria for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. And if it does, and either state's state historic preservation officer and office concur that it does meet the criteria for listing in the National Register, then that resource is considered eligible and is therefore considered forward in the Section 106 process. However, on the other side of that, if the resource at the determination of eligibility phase is determined to not meet the criteria for listing in the National Register, and that is concurred with by either state's Historic Preservation Office, then that resource does not continue forward in the Section 106 analysis. So we would not take it to the next step, step 3, where we would be assessing effects. I'm going to pause there briefly. And please, Martha, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
I'm interested in the study area that you are looking at. Are you just looking at like WASH.ODOT right of way? Are you looking at the areas that you anticipate being disturbed? Are you looking at, say, resources that might be impacted by noise or something like that? How do you determine that?
That's a really great question. And frankly, a deliverable that's missing from this list as the #1 spot, kind of where we first start. And that's a great point of feedback for me to consider as I continue. But that is delineated in what we call the Section 106 area of potential effect. And we are so very much at that stage that actually went out to Section 106 consulting parties yesterday for review and input. And so what that looks like is the project footprint area with a little bit of a buffer around the entirety of that project footprint area so that we can incorporate any changes, any indirect effects, and understand those resources immediately adjacent to that project area. One small caveat that I will note is that for the above ground element, we analyze almost everything within that area of potential effect. There are some situations in which if the resource is really large, let's say, for example, the fort, then we may not deeply analyze resources all the way at the east end per se. There are more of those that are closer, but we do take a look at all of the built resources within that kind of buffered space outside of the footprint. However, for archaeology, we tend to focus more on where areas are going to be disturbed for that testing and analysis and understanding, unless there is information that would lead us to believe that analysis outside of that is appropriate. So great question. Yes, that is the first thing that we establish is where are we studying our impacts and where are we studying resources? And that's the area of potential effect and something that we are working to develop and finalize right now. So we're looking forward to sharing that as well in our public online open house in April and getting any input there as well. So thanks for that. Okay, before I continue, I just want to check and see if there are any other questions. Okay. So those finding of effect forms, as I was mentioning, correlate directly to step 3, assessing effects. So that will go resource by resource for those resources that in the previous phase, we said, okay, yes, these are eligible for listing in the National Register, and we'll carry those forward in the Section 106 process. So now what that will look like is for each one, we will say, okay, how is this resource being impacted? And many other sort of specific categories of data and information are included to help describe and quantify our effect there. So those all bring those together, and then that allows us to develop specific forms for submittal for approval with each respective state's Historic Preservation Office. So in Oregon, just the DOE and FOE forms are what we submit for review and concurrence. However, in Washington, the Washington State Historic Preservation Office has an online platform called WISARD, WISAARD. It is a database acronym for all of the resources that they contain within there. And I am sorry that I cannot describe the entirety of it for you, but if anybody is interested, I'm happy to send that out separately. But it maintains a cultural resources database. And so for the Washington properties, for the findings of effects and the determinations of eligibility, we will actually upload those into their specific forms in the WISARD database in Washington. So that's why you're seeing that as a sort of separate line item as a deliverable. From there, all of that analysis that we've conducted in the baseline, DOE, FOE, and those WISARD forms will then help us inform our technical reports for the SEIS and the SFEIS. So that's kind of how we're generating the information that we're sharing in those technical reports, which will summarize everything that we've learned and understood, bring information from CRC forward, all of those past analyses, and where we understand we are now, sort of which resources have come into that picture and what we're seeing in this moment with the IBR program. So that leaves us with the last major deliverable here, which I'd mentioned previously as the programmatic agreement. And I think actually, next slide, please, which will go a little bit more into a programmatic agreement and might be a great one for us to use to talk about. Thank you. Great. So as I've noted, the other agreement vehicle is, besides a project programmatic agreement, is a memorandum of agreement. And it is either of these documents, agreement documents, are the last step in the Section 106 process. They are what close out Section 106 and allow us to hand that over to the NEPA team, to the permitting teams, and everybody else that needs confirmation that Section 106 is complete for any of those other processes to continue, which is really important because many of them do require that. So an MOA was executed for CRC in 2011. However, moving forward, the IBR program will be electing to utilize a project level programmatic agreement to replace that existing MOA and discuss forward what that looks like for our program. And so I want to talk a little bit about sort of why and a PA, what's maybe a little bit of the difference, and why we've elected to utilize that here. And so the primary takeaway, I would say, for where a project PA is appropriate is when there are multiple elements to that, but the big ones kind of are twofold here. And one of them is that the agency, in situations where the agency cannot fully determine how a particular undertaking or impact of a program may affect historic properties, or if the location of historic properties and their significance we're not able to locate those fully before we need to approve the project or finalize the Section 106. And so with IBR, with as many construction and delivery methods that we are considering, and with the potential for those to change the way in which we are understanding how the impacts will be, then the programmatic agreement will allow for us to describe exactly how Section 106 resources will be identified, effects assessed, and any mitigation, if necessary, after what we identify as part of our NEPA process, how we'll move through that in a post-NEPA situation. So that will really be effective for us to be able to, what we call sort of programmatically address resources. And essentially, like the most simple way to put it is that it makes an agreement document that everybody has to sign about how we will do Section 106 after we've already closed it out. And so in this situation, that may be because there's information that is not possible for us to locate at this time, or we have other large construction approaches like we do here, and large construction undertakings that can be a little bit varied, and really need a tool to be able to ensure that cultural resources will be treated appropriately in that process. So our focus is on ensuring that that future component of our program can appropriately and effectively consider cultural resources and those effects therein. So I see I've got a hand there, so I'll pause. Please go ahead.
So have we, and I apologize if I missed it because I did get something I had to respond to for a minute. Have we identified what we think might be identified as a cultural resource, and we have an awareness of what we're going to be dealing with going forward, or is this just all exploratory?
Yeah, so we, where I mentioned that we are currently is that we are in the process of defining our exact study area that we will identify cultural resources within. And then we're taking our first steps for identification of cultural resources now. So that's kind of where we are in our process broadly at this moment. And then where we'll move into next is assessing effects to those resources that we understand and are able to identify in this kind of larger NEPA process here. And so, and I should say too, that the goal of of this effort, even with a programmatic agreement in place, is that we capture everything available to us right now. This is more of a planning effort on the back end in case we miss anything, or if we know that we've got these kind of complex construction methods and approaches that we're utilizing that may require support for cultural resources in the future, if needed.
So when we were working on the CRC, did we go through the process? I wasn't as involved then. Did we go through the process of identifying some of those items during that process? And so you have a starting point?
Yes, ma'am, that's exactly right. So we are able to utilize the CRC findings for the cultural resources within this area. However, it has been 10 years. And so we are doing a lot of work to reevaluate the area for resources that have become historic since CRC did their evaluation, resources that have been removed, and then other things that we have learned over the last 10 years about the cultural history of this place, and expanding our understanding of resources with that additional information in mind.
Well, and I think the design of the bridge has a different footprint than what we were looking at with the CRC. So the impact could be different there as well, correct?
That's right. So grabbing additional resources that have been brought into the study area as a result of the change in the footprint as well, or in our case, actually is reducing those resources more substantially than adding them in this case.
All right. Thank you for the clarification.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. So we will, in moving forward with our programmatic agreement, seek to establish our process for post-evaluation of cultural resources where needed. But most importantly, we will close out the Section 106 process by delineating, and articulating all of the mitigation that we will do for the adverse effects that we have identified that I mentioned there in step 3 of the 106 process. So when we say, okay, yes, there will be an adverse effect, then we begin to consult with the consulting parties and the public to understand how we should mitigate for that adverse effect in the situations where we cannot avoid, and the minimization is either not possible or still results in an adverse effect to that property or resource. And so that's the bulk of what the programmatic agreement aims to do, is to reach an agreement, a legal one, of how we will conduct that mitigation, who will conduct that mitigation, where, through which methods, in consultation with whom, etc. It really brings a very large package of effort into a single agreement document to carry forward and hold everybody accountable to ensuring that that mitigation is implemented appropriately and as agreed upon. So that's the broad look at what that programmatic agreement will offer the program. Go ahead, slide, please. Great, and we've talked through a little bit of where it is appropriate for IBR, but here are some extra, oh, and I'm sorry, Martha, I just saw your hand come up. So before I dive in here, maybe I'll go ahead and let you ask your question, please.
Yeah, so in this case, the bridge itself is 106 years old next week. So that is a historic resource. So what happens there?
That's a really good question. So that's a really great example of an adverse effect that we know is going to happen here, because that's right. The bridge itself is an historic resource, and actually now a great example of your earlier question, Martha, of resources aging in. So is the other span, because it is now old enough to be considered an historic resource as well. So both spans are actually historic resources as we cross the river there. So that will be a complete, that is most certainly an adverse effect due to the complete removal of planned removal of those two resources. And so what we will be doing is that, that's unavoidable for what we've delineated here as our approach to the program. And so because of that, then what we will be doing is discussing, once we move through the process to arrive at that adverse effect, even though we all know that that's going to happen, we have to sort of move methodically through the process and wait for that sort of official concurrence determination. And then once we reach that point, then we'll be really excited to be working with the community, the communities here, the Section 106 consulting parties, and the public to understand what mitigation will be appropriate for the loss of those historic bridges. So that is something that we have done a lot of really creative and interesting mitigation, and I'm super looking forward to that part of this process for IBR. I will say that generating and sort of facilitating the mitigation discussion is one of my favorite parts of this job. So I'm looking forward to that.
Haley, could you maybe offer a little commentary in terms of what some of those mitigations, might be? I mean, that's kind
Yeah.
of the purest thing.
For sure. So I always try to give a foundational understanding of mitigation in being very clear that each mitigation is different because it is most appropriate for the specific resource and its loss or the effect to it. And that mitigation is not to be decided upon or dictated by the agency, but instead is to be understood from the community that's being affected by that loss and understanding what would most appropriately mitigate for that loss. So I just want to put that down as the foundation of understanding around mitigation and adverse effects. But with that being said, some successful mitigation that we've conducted for other bridge removals have been like, for example, this bridge has sort of pylons at each end that were a part of the original design that have been saved in other kind of interpretive elements. General historical understanding is often generated where it did not previously exist. Some really great outreach with and generation of school curriculum to help students understand the resources or things that we've done. You know, it ranges from kind of interpretive panels to so many various different creative ideas, but welcome centers or, you know, videos for education or other ways that we can best serve the community that is being affected by the adverse effect, essentially, or by the loss of the resource. It can be pretty broad. And so we'll do, as we move into that element on this program, then as we gear up to kind of work with the Section 106 consulting parties and the public on that question specifically, then we'll do our best to sort of say, here are some menu options that we've seen in other situations, but we really want to understand what would work best for you, the impacted users here.
Thank you for that. And just a note for CAG, you'll be involved in that process as well. And we'll have an opportunity of weighing in as a part of that community engagement effort.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. But I do just want to also say that anytime that I'm referencing the public, that absolutely means a very direct and targeted discussion here at the CAG as well. Thank you. So some additional reasons why a programmatic agreement is appropriate as we move forward for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And one of those is the involvement of many federally recognized tribes that we're consulting with as part of this effort. And so I do also want to clarify that Section 106 itself is a public process and one in which we are extremely transparent with information, and we do a lot of consultation with all sorts of parties, tribes included, who are considered Section 106 consulting parties as part of the Section 106 process. But that is different than government to government tribal consultation. And that is a separate process that is different than what we're talking about here as part of this public process for Section 106. So just want to quickly clarify the difference there as we proceed here. So another reason why it's really important to consider a programmatic agreement for IBR is the involvement of multiple federal agencies with individual Section 106 compliance responsibilities. So for Section 106 for IBR, the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration are the Section 106 co-leads. So they are primarily responsible for that compliance. However, the National Park Service, for example, is responsible for compliance on their properties with Section 106. And so with so many different agencies coming together, this will make a nice, clear agreement document and process for us to understand how we should best proceed in consult with everybody. We also, as I've mentioned previously, have a high potential for post-NEPA decision-making, given the use of alternative delivery approaches to our program here. And then lastly, the high probability of extremely sensitive cultural resources that may not be identified until after we complete NEPA compliance and the completion of detailed project design. And that can be for a lot of different reasons that we're not able to identify those. That, you know, there could be additional archaeological resources, let's say, beneath the existing roadway. And that's not something that we can necessarily excavate while actively being used as a roadway, as an example. So that's kind of what we mean by those that we're not able to identify, is that for some reason we're not able to access that space until we get into construction. And so that will allow for us to understand how to appropriately treat those resources in a post-NEPA sort of realm. Okay, I think the next slide is sort of my wrap up and just some resources, so we can go ahead and proceed there. Thank you very much. And I'll talk a little bit about some of these. So an agent or a group that I haven't talked much about, but is a really critical role in Section 106 is the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. And they're sort of the oversight national council that ensures that all of the federal agencies are complying with Section 106 and play a large role in ensuring that there is adequate public understanding and education around the Section 106 process. And so that top link there will give you access to some of that understanding and materials that organization has prepared in case you are interested. If you would like a more in-depth look at 106, really get into the weeds of every step of the way, then this Federal Highways Section 106 tutorial, it's new and it's really good. So I strongly recommend, if you would like that more detailed look, that is a perfect resource for that. And then the last resource that I have linked here is the Oregon Department of Transportation Historic Resources Procedural Manual. And the reason I've included that one is largely because it does a really great job of describing those deliverables that I mentioned previously, exactly what they are, what that process looks like, and delving into all of those details. And so if that is of interest to you, then I wanted to provide that information as well. So with that, I think I will pause finally, and hopefully I spoke slow enough, and make sure to open up the floor for any questions.
Thank you, Haley. It's never easy to share a bunch of technical information with people who have varying levels of background and insight. And I'm just going to say, being over Zoom probably doesn't make it any easier. So thank you for digging in, and thank you to people who asked questions as they went. I suspect many of us had the same questions. So I think we kind of asked the questions as we went, but I'm fine with us if there are additional questions. But I was listening at the beginning of your presentation, knowing that this was our follow-up question. And what are the types of things that the community can be helpful in bringing to your attention? Because I think one clear takeaway is we're better off addressing these things sooner rather than later, both for project purposes, but also just to identify and mitigate and have it be kind of a high-touch, community-driven process. So how can our community, both the people on this call and the people that they know and influence and communicate with, how can they help you and the program?
That's a really great question, Lynn, and I'm glad that you've asked, because I think it's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about what that is for us and how we can engage and what can be helpful. And so a lot of the times with public outreach, and you'll see when we do launch our online open house in April, we do have some targeted questions that we'll include for the public. And a lot of those are really surrounding, what do you know about this space that we don't already know? So what we're largely asking for is, say, here's what we've analyzed, here's what we understand. What are we missing? Because the reality is that with so many layers of history, so many cultures, so many people, and so many different movements throughout history, it's nearly impossible to capture everything adequately in the first try. And so we really rely on the communities and the place and the public to help us understand what we might not have already gathered. Because as we move forward through the Section 106 process, it's hard for us to assess effects to resources that we don't maybe understand fully. And so a lot of times, much of this area has been documented historically. And so really at this point, and especially through CRC. And so really at this point, we are focusing very strongly on ensuring that we understand appropriately and adequately any underrepresented communities in this area that may not have already had an enormous amount of historical contextual analysis sort of developed, and how we can ensure that we're understanding their experience in this place. And that ranges from a lot of different communities. So, that's a pretty broad element. And that is really a big focus that we have as far as our outreach is concerned here, is really making sure that we're engaging with as many communities as we can, and making sure that if there's anything missing about that history that we've represented, or anything that's incorrect, that we ensure that that is appropriately corrected and appropriately represented, so that all users, all history can be analyzed as we move forward for those effects, and then everybody is equitably understood for effects and mitigation as we proceed forward. Does that help? Do you have any follow-up there? I'm happy to speak to it further. Okay.
I'm more practical than theoretical, in part because this isn't something I have deep knowledge of. So I'm kind of thinking if there's anything that's on the Clark County GIS database, you know about it, right? So what you're really looking for is maybe stories of families who had an engagement with a physical asset, whether it's above ground or below ground, that wouldn't be represented in that manner, right?
That's right. That's
okay.
A really fantastic way to put that, actually. Yes, that's exactly right.
So I do want to open it up for the group because Section 106 was something we all wanted to know about. I'm sure none of us feel like we know enough, but we certainly know more than we did before Haley and Cassie started presenting. So questions, ideas, comments? Again, if you have knowledge at this point, sharing so that they can do research would be very appropriate.
Mr. Co-Chair, Ed Washington has his hand up. Okay, great. Thanks, Shannon. And apologies, Haley. I was looking at Cassie earlier and I said Cassie when I instead of Haley. So
that's all right. And Lisa, maybe a good opportunity to introduce ourselves. I did not do a great job of that at the outset, but I'm Haley and I am the Interstate Bridge Replacement Cultural Resources Program Manager. So I am largely responsible for overseeing the process for Section 106 and a law that we didn't talk about today, but does also relate to cultural resources, and that is Section 4F. Whereas Cassie, I'll let you introduce yourself. It's a little bit
great.
Different.
Thank you, Haley.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm Cassie Rippey. I'm the tribal liaison for the IBR project. And really my job is to help coordinate between ODOT and WashDOT and the tribes. We have 10 federally recognized tribes and a non-federally recognized tribe that are consulting on this project. So I'm here to just help facilitate those conversations and make sure that those voices are heard and understood.
I really appreciate both of you here.
Yeah, I am also a qualified archaeologist in Oregon and Washington, so helping to support Haley in all of the amazing work that she does.
Good.
I guess one question that I have, did somebody have their hand up?
Ed had his hand up, and then I wanted to apologize to Haley and then make sure that Haley and Cassie both had the opportunity to maybe answer Ed's question. So Ed, did you want to lean in here? Ed, we can't hear you.
You're on mute, I'm afraid.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Alrighty.
Okay. Yeah, I said thank you for coming back. I don't have a burning question, but I just have a thought, something to have. But I was losing. My system went down. But I'm just curious. Are there which side of the river has the most cultural resources, or where do you anticipate most of those resources? Is it on both sides of the river, or are there more on the Washington side? I'm just curious about that.
That's a good question. We have a large number on both sides. Inherently based on just the geographic area on the Oregon side of our program area and the geographic area on the Washington side, there are more built environment resources in Washington that are within our study area, since it's obviously a lot more urban than that North Portland kind of expo center area. So on the built environment side, there are just happen to be a higher number in the Washington area based on sort of geographic elements. Archaeology is really pretty equitable across the board, I would say, on sort of resource evaluation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I did have one other kind of clarifying question. We did some archaeological on a less impactful program. Okay, by definition, all programs are less impactful. So let me stop that. But every eligible resource doesn't necessarily require mitigation. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly. So the eligible resource is determined in that identification phase and kind of confirmation. Okay, yes, this is eligible, and we'll take this through to assess effects. Now, when we assess effects, we may find this is not going to be adversely affected. There's not going to be a negative effect to this resource because it's not being directly impacted, or, it's not within the direct footprint, et cetera. And so there are certainly going to be quite a few resources that may be found to have no adverse effect, is what we call that. And so then that's sort of where those resources end in the Section 106 process. Only those resources that have that adverse effect are carried forward for discussion for mitigation. If there's no adverse effect, then that consideration concludes at that phase.
So let me just say, and this is different than compensation and everything else, but if I had a shed that was sitting somewhere and it was, 50 years old, it would and it was going to be impacted negatively in some manner, that would be carried forward for discussion on mitigation, but mitigation may or may not be required, or is mitigation always required?
So if you let's say we take that example. So if you have the shed first has to be determined to be eligible for a listing in the National Register, which means that it has some sort of historic importance.
Okay, that's where that filter goes.
Yes.
Okay, I knew there was a filter. I just wasn't sure when it
yeah.
Okay.
And so if it has historic significance and there's an adverse effect, then there's mitigation. But if there's no historic significance, then we don't even talk about effects. If there's significance, but maybe there's no effect, that's where that ends. So only those that meet both of those criteria are carried forward for the mitigation discussion. Really good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? We have another presentation on community engagement, but Martha, did you have another question? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm always leaning in on these things, but I wonder if you have considered talking to the neighborhood associations once you've identified the historic resources, the above ground resources, to see if there are some stories. You were talking about stories that might, the longer term residents might know of those resources. And that's my only comment.
Yeah, that is precisely one of the ways that we are anticipating engaging with the community to kind of, as was asked previously, sort of how can the community help? And that's exactly what we have in mind. And so we're working with the communications team to put together an approach and a plan to, when we do have public information to share in a couple of months, to ensure that we're outreaching with those sorts of groups and communities to be sure that we capture everybody's input as much as we possibly can. And I should also note that as we proceed, we will have many public touch points on Section 106. So several other opportunities to gather information and incorporate it appropriately, even if maybe we missed it the first time. So it won't be, it's not just one chance. We'll have many touch point opportunities to ensure that we're incorporating all of that appropriately. Thank you.
Well, Haley and Cassie, thank you very much. We all know ever so much more than we did before we logged on. Really appreciate your joining us and providing great information and insight and answering our questions that kind of show the rudimentary knowledge. So thank you so much. I just want to say to the CAG as a whole, we know that you're engaged and we know you're connected. So we're constantly looking for ways to leverage that. So that's why the question was asked. It's not that we're solely relying on this group, but you guys are really well connected. And so we want to make sure that where we have an opportunity to leverage that, background and kind of social interaction, that we take advantage of that. So with that, we're going to talk about community engagement. I think we need to put some slides back up and introduce Salome. Salome is going to talk to us about what the team has been up to and will be up to. So Salome, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Salome, or Salome. My pronouns are she, her, and I work with the equity team and also throughout comms, but more specifically with community engagement. It's good to see you all this evening, and I will get started on this presentation. So some of the recent engagement that we've had, we have had one meeting with a stakeholder organization. These are community-based organizations or groups that take particular interest in the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And we've had one meeting with neighborhood associations And then we also did a presentation to Vancouver iTech Preparatory School. Also, recent engagement or movement that is happening is that we will soon be going through another iteration of our community-based organization mini grants. And so those applications will be opening pretty soon here, and keep an eye on your emails because we will be sending them to CAG members to distribute to any community-based organizations that they may have relationships with. And next slide, please. So for our upcoming engagement, we have presented this slide to you before, so hopefully it's not new to you, but to go over just some key elements of some of the different types of engagement that we plan to do for the supplemental draft environmental impact statement, is that we're going to be doing a lot of briefings to community-based organizations and to neighborhood associations and groups. This is going to be in an effort to make sure that the public is aware of the things that we're doing, has an opportunity to weigh in and give feedback, as well as inform the work that we're doing. As I mentioned in the last slide, we're also going to be doing miniature grant partnerships with some of these community-based organizations to have a wider and stronger reach. We are going to be conducting some listening sessions, some of which will be in affinity to promote equity, and others will be for the general public. We are going to be focusing on doing a youth press conference. This is because last year we had a youth press conference, and what those look like is engaging with high schoolers and with college age students to give them access to the program and to the project and to leadership on the program, to ask questions that they want to ask in a space that is for youth. And so we will also be conducting conversations at neighborhood forums, like I mentioned earlier, as well as doing tabling at fairs and festivals and other such events. So some of this future engagement, you may wonder what we're going to be talking about. Most of our focus will be talking about design elements such as bridge design, transit station design and access, and aesthetics, along with active transportation, as well as talking about community benefits and workforce opportunities. And so because of the content, that's why you see you'll see a focus on youth, you'll see a focus on transit, and our equity priority communities as always. And with a lot of this engagement, like co-chair Valenter said, we are coming to you not solely to do the introductions, but to know that you all are connected and well respected in your communities, and to make sure that we are reaching as many people as we possibly can. Next slide, please. So I know that this question was asked and Haley kind of answered it, but to go over, we will be doing some of this engagement around the work that the cultural resource team is working on. And this will be in support to make sure that we are compliant with Section 106, and also to make sure that we are, again, writing this section with community as opposed to writing the narrative and defining it for them. So some of these engagement opportunities are going to be an online open house webpage, so folks can learn more about Section 106 and ask questions and do their own little research. Some of it will be working with the CBOs and other community-based organizations to do listening sessions. We're going to make sure that we are going to do in-person canvassing and finding folks and meeting them where they are at, and as well as a direct and indirect outreach through things such as social media, newsletter, our advisory groups, which is you all, and making sure that we are trying to get to as many people as possible to explain this process, and also to hear their feedback and get some of their own insight and knowledge that we may not know. Next slide, please. And so I have these discussion questions for us. Well, the first one is, what questions or feedback do you have about the events we have planned. And also the second question is, what events do you want to see IBR at this summer? And I know that next month you will be talking about design elements, but we'll also do a deeper discussion into community engagement as well. But those are the two questions that I have for you tonight. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. I just have a question. What is the I want to even just say geographical area that you're focusing on, or are you just focusing on the general area of the bridge footprint area, or are you going to take it out to neighborhoods across, I'll say across Vancouver, across Portland, across the counties that are I'll say closer, that may be affected overall because of travel back and forth across the bridges?
That's a great question, Bill. To answer your question, Greg likes our community engagement team to be free range. So we go as far as we can because everyone in the area uses the bridge. And so we are not just focusing on just people immediately next to the bridge or the program area, but expanding outward.
Great, that's what
So that's a great answer. And Bill, we will go anywhere. I've made presentations throughout the 4-county area and down in Salem, up in Olympia. So we will go where folks have questions about this.
I would say because, of course, I-5 being major thoroughfare for both transportation and moving goods and services, it's good to reach out to those other than right here. And I know the physical build will affect a lot of people locally, but overall, the whole design and process and access will affect a lot more people.
Yeah, and we heard that quite a bit, Bill, in our listening sessions and in our outreach to community-based organizations. It's just us acknowledging that with a lot of the development in the area, there are communities who have been pushed further out, but still use the bridge, and especially those who use it for work. And so we want to make sure that we are being equitable and reaching out to everyone that uses the bridge and going as far as we can where people have questions.
Sure, and I know that Greg is well aware of the political aspects of that, and politics from every corner of this state and every other state around. So thank you.
Thank you. And Sam?
Can I just one second, Salome? I want to just do a quick time check. It's 5:40, and I see a lot of hands, which I really want to keep this engagement. So Brent, I'm just going to ask that you turn your video on if we start having folks that would like to provide public comment. And then I'll just maybe pivot us over. But I'd like for us to spend as much time in this space if we can. So just a heads up, though, I'm going to intervene again if it looks like we do have folks that want to provide public comment, because we want to make sure that we have space and time for that as well. So, okay, keep going, Salome.
All right, so I'll keep my comments short. I like to reiterate, use us, invite us, let us participate, let us be the free-ranging CAG group members that you want us to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
I think you got signed up, Sam, last time for, what was it? How many hours does the Clark County Fair run every day?
I think it was 9 days, 9 days, 18 hours, something like that.
Yeah, that's what I heard, Sam. But
hey, free admission. I'll be there.
And I think Dina, you were next.
Thank you. Yeah, we were very happy to have the team come to our annual convention in October of last year. We do have another convention coming up in October of this year. Perhaps we can get an update then as well with all of our members for our annual group. We do have a summer conference, but it's up in Everett. I was curious that since you mentioned the Clark County Fair, if that was, something else, like not necessarily a community group per se, but if it is a large event like Clark County Fair or, you know, something like the Cowlitz County Fair, I think they have a rodeo or something else up there that's well attended as well. But if there's events like that, are you having tables and booths at to, you know, to provide that, or is it just you're looking specifically for groups to invite you or you know, have you come give presentations to?
That's a great question. It's both. And so we have gone to really populated events like Good in the Hood in Portland that aren't necessarily around a specific group, but a really well-attended event. And so we want to make sure that we're getting as far as we can. So I'll definitely make sure to take notes on those events that you mentioned and follow up via email to get some details so we can make sure that we're present. And then Tom?
Hi, at the last meeting, I recommended that you reach out to the Neighborhood Association District Coalitions where you can check off 10 or 20 neighborhoods at a time. And I just wanted to reiterate again that would be a very good strategy for outreach to the neighborhood community.
Thank you, Tom. And we did take your comment to heart. And so we are reaching out to those association districts because we are doing neighborhood forums as some of our outreach. So we will be reaching out to them. Martha?
Yeah, I would like to see you guys do an event at the Vancouver Community Library downtown. They have a lovely community room there, and they often do events that this would just be right in line with, and people hear about those things in ways that they may not be hearing about the other things you're talking about.
Thank you so much, Martha. We'll take that into heart. And we've actually did in-person canvassing at the library, so I will definitely follow up with the library staff and see if that's possible. Mr. Washington?
Yes, I'm just curious about one of the things you have was equity roundtables. Can you just talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so our equity roundtables are centered around having conversations on the intersection of equity in this project, as well as beyond. And so we've had some in the past. Last year, we had one focused on the Black community's experience with big infrastructure projects that you participated in, as well as Johnell and others. We had one in September on why equity and diversity matters on transportation projects. And then the one in December that we just recently had was focused on accessibility and people living with disabilities and the intersection between them and transportation projects. We're planning for one in late March that's going to be focused on women in transportation to give or pay respect to March being Women's History Month and other commemorative dates involving women. So we're going to be talking about women in infrastructure. So those are what to look forward to. If you'd like to be on one, want to serve as a panelist, we definitely welcome them. We do reach out to CAG members and other advisory group members to serve as panelists.
I'm happy to help any time that I can, but I would also encourage all the other members of CAG to please feel free to participate in those also if your time and schedule permits it. Thank you.
And Bill?
Yep. Sorry about coming back in, but one last thing. Owami has a trade show in May 11th. We have a number of companies already and people that are on this call that are going to be there, but I would encourage you to give me a call or give me an email and I'll see what we can do to help get you a booth there. There's going to be probably at least 1,000, maybe 2,000 people coming through there all day, and we do have a big luncheon and everything. So it's a good place to meet a lot of people, especially I'll say in the construction, government, education, all the realms that are there. So
Thank you so much, Bill. I'll definitely put that in my notes to make sure that we have that event down. And, you know, I heard the overwhelming support from you all. So hopefully my goal is by the end of the year, you feel like we're best friends because I'm calling you consistently and just checking in on you and seeing where you're at and seeing if you want to come hang out with me someplace. So thank you so much for your support. And I'll throw it back to Lisa to make sure we have time for public comment.
Thanks,
Darcy,
Salome.
you have something really quick?
I'm so sorry.
No,
I was
take your
just
time.
thinking, Martha mentioned the Fort Vancouver Library, downtown Vancouver. I know that they have their small business resource fair coming up soon. It's in March. Is that already on your list?
We're aware of it, and so we're going to try to see if we can get coverage for that. I can't speak for the rest of the team because I will be out most of March in Africa, but I will definitely make sure the team is aware and see if we can get some other people to go, if not myself.
Awesome.
Salome does a phenomenal job of being out in the community. And if you haven't been to Farmers Market in downtown Vancouver, or you haven't been over at Good in the Hood, she is out answering questions, and it's fun to be out there and to see her and the rest of the team. It is really impactful to have members of this community part of that. So whether that's this summer at fairs and festivals, or it's at a PNWA conference, or some other location where we can reach stakeholders, we really want to ensure that, I love that free range, that we are reaching as many folks as possible. So the ideas are helpful. I think the purpose was to try and be where folks are and not have folks feel like they have to come to us. And so fundamentally, I think the ideas and the purpose of asking this question is to generate a curiosity around, are we missing a place we need to be? Salome?
I almost forgot to say, also with these events, please invite us to even culturally specific events. I personally speak 6 languages, so I don't mind talking to whomever and whatever they feel comfortable speaking. And so let us know. We do have resources to be able to accommodate and make ourselves present for any group that wants to get information.
See, again, she's amazing. So I think it's about that time where we try to pivot to public comment. Brent, do we have folks that want to participate in our public comment period?
No one has signed up yet for public comment, but if they do, please remember to turn down your YouTube stream. It's about a 30-second delay.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and maybe finish up the slides and see if anyone wants to join. So next program meetings, we have our Equity Advisory Group that's meeting on February 27th. We're back here in this Zoom room again for our Community Advisory Group meeting March 9th. I'm really excited to have Nolan, who leads our urban design. And those of you that have been involved in our CAG for a couple years might recall during our orientation, Nolan was a part of that and really did kind of a high level overview about urban design. But it's an area I think the Community Advisory Group has been anxious to dig into. And so at the next meeting, we'll be spending some time starting to get into those details. So March 9th. And then we are anticipating both a bi-state legislative committee and an executive steering committee in that March, kind of April timeframe. So we're on track for March 9th. We know what that topic's going to look like. And then there'll be a couple other meetings that the program will likely have as well that we'll just keep you updated on and send out the links to those. Next slide. This is our time for an opportunity for public comment. Just again, to make sure that folks that are watching on YouTube, if you would like to make a public comment, we invite you to address our Community Advisory Group, either by making verbal public comments via our Zoom webinar. And now is the time. So we'd love for you to either comment by dialing in 1-669-900-6833. Enter meeting ID 993-5459-6043, passcode 674942. Dial *9 to raise your hand. And after you are invited to speak by myself, you'll dial *6 to unmute yourself. We do have a little less than about 10 minutes, but would like to give folks the opportunity to provide public comment. Next slide. If you are unable to provide public comment, then we invite you to send an email to info@interstatebridge.org. Please ensure in the subject line you have added CAG Public Comment. You may also call us. We have a Washington, Oregon, and a toll-free number. Again, we ask that you specifically mention CAG so that we can provide the information to our community advisory group. For the last 2 months, we actually have not received any public comments. So for those members of the CAG who have been wondering, I don't seem to have a packet of information that's been emailed to me. It's not because we haven't just gotten it over to you, we just haven't received anything. So if there is interest by the public to provide comments to our CAG, we will pass those along 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting. Next slide. All right, Brent, anyone? Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and take down the slides, and I'm gonna pass it to our co-chairs after asking our program administrator, Greg Johnson, if you have any final thoughts, and then our co-chairs can wrap us up and close the meeting.
Just one quick thought on public comment. We do have a excellent footprint in social media, and we do see the comments that come in on Facebook and Instagram and all of those things. And I read every one of them. Some of them are quite amusing, some of them are quite insulting, but we do read them, and we do try and respond to the ones that are responsible. So, but thank you, everyone. Once again, I enjoy the hours that we spend together, and not that Section 106 is not an exciting endeavor, but I think as we start getting into the urban design, I think this team is really gonna find its footing and get a chance to give us some great feedback. So I look forward to the March meeting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Brent, you unmuted. Do we have someone calling in for public comment?
Nope, I was just gonna say bye to everybody. Sound
Oh,
like the right
I was
time,
gonna see.
so.
I was gonna see if our co-chairs wanted to say anything before we wrapped up. But Brent, you're like, we're going. So
Okay, I want to say one thing, and then Ed always leaves us all feeling better about this and life, so I don't want to deny him that. But I just want to thank everyone for hanging in. It's a long meeting. Zoom makes it different than it would be if we were in person, the tour aside. But thank you. Keep coming, and it's next month should be really interesting. But we all care about getting this bridge built, and we know it's a long slog, but the program team is feeling like they're just racing. So behind the scenes, there's so much happening, but we do thank you and appreciate you continuing to stay engaged. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my inspirational co-chair, Ed.
Yes, I hope you can hear me, because I keep getting a little bit of a breakup. But I'd like to say to all of the staff members, thank you so very much for your excellent presentations today. And to all members of the CAG, just want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. And Greg, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. And I think that really the best is yet to come. We're moving, and I was so impressed by that picture that Hailey put on. I'm gonna go and find out who all those people were on that picture, because so many of them look so familiar, and I had no idea. That it just lets you know how powerful those kinds of things are, and the fact that that was done back in a time when people were willing to get together and talk about it, you know, for the better. So I'm going to say good evening. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And I think that I'm working hard to deliver you another day weather-wise tomorrow like we had today. So have a good evening, and we'll see you next time around. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all. See y'all.